Hello and welcome to my presentation of black coats and North American gray wolves. This presentation is going to focus on how crossbreeding of wolves and dogs passed a gene deletion mutation and produced a new coat color in the gray wolves of North America. So what causes a black coat? The K locus originated in dogs and is controlled by several different genes. It is the dominant black gene and it is due to a deleterious mutation in the beta defensin gene, also known as CBD103. It is controlled by the E locus, which is MC1R. When E is recessive, the K is not expressed. This is shown in this chart over here, where when E is recessive and not expressed, the dog is usually like a cream or like a red kind of color, whereas when E is dominant and it is expressed, the K locus is expressed as well. So originally, wolves do possess an E locus, and that determines how yellow or red their coat will be. So a recessive E usually produces like a cream or a tawny wolf with no black. So researchers initially thought that the black coat was a mutation of the wolf's E locus, but could not find any mutations on the MC1R, so they knew that it had to be something else. Where did the K locus come from? Wolves may be ancestors of dogs, but they did not contain the K locus originally. Black wolves are very rare outside of North America. There is evidence that there are black wolves in like the Italy kind of area of Europe, which is also probably due to the crossbreeding. So the general hypothesis that is agreed upon is that during human migration across the Bering Strait, wolves crossbred with dogs and gained the mutation that way. You can see in this density chart over here that as the introgression time kind of like decreases, the introgression frequency increases. So the gene kind of took over very quickly. It only took about like 1 or 2 generations for the gene to completely take over, and this is present in Alaska, the Northwest Territories, and Yukon, which is a province in Canada. So all in that general kind of area of going across the Bering Strait into North America. This leads into how the black coat has been able to proliferate and kind of grow. Because it is a mutation, one would expect that it would not be as present as it is today, but about 45% of gray wolves possess a black coat, specifically in the Yellowstone population. You can see from this figure that up here in Alaska, it's about 50-50. This figure also shows Yellowstone National Park is kind of a 50-50 as well. And as we go more towards the east of Canada, this amount actually decreases. The black gene is dominant, so it's more likely to be expressed if a dominant wolf, wolf with a dominant coat is going to breed with a wolf with a recessive coat. It's more likely to show up and take over pretty much. North America is a much more forested region than Canada and Greenland. Northern Canada particularly, because it's much more, they still have forests, but it's much more snowy there. Same with Greenland, like it's a very cold, very snowy kind of area, as opposed to like the Oregon, Washington kind of area, in the lower parts of Canada, where the black coat is much more prevalent. Research indicates that there's also a link between immunity and the K locus to certain pathogens and parasites, specifically the canine distemperament virus. So going more into those immunity effects, there are 3 genotypes for the K locus. There's KBB, which is homozygous black. There's KBY, which is heterozygous black, and KYY, which is homozygous gray. KBB wolves have the lowest fitness of the 3, with only about 2% surviving to adulthood. There isn't enough research done on KBB wolves because they are so rare, but the main kind of idea that researchers are kind of going with right now is that because they have 2 copies of the B allele, it actually makes their immune system overactive, especially when the canine distemperament virus is not present. On the contrary, KYB wolves have the highest fitness, especially when the canine distemperament virus is present. It can fluctuate a little bit with KYY wolves sometimes becoming more fit if CDV is not present, within the population, but for the most part, it's the heterozygotes have the advantage. You can see in this chart that wolves who are exposed to the virus, specifically the heterozygotes, have the highest rate of recovery. With young wolves, it's at about like a 0.8, and for older wolves, it's at about 0.65, whereas the homozygous gray wolves have a slightly lower chance for young wolves and a significantly lower chance in older wolves, and the heterozygote or the homozygous black wolves have kind of a very static recovery rate because they're so rare and it's much harder to research them. So the KY and the KB alleles are being maintained through balancing selection because of the heterozygote advantage that they have. So behavioral effects. It has been discovered that the introduction of the K locus has changed sexual selection in the wolf population. Wolves now exhibit disassortive mating, which is where they will seek out individuals with the opposite coat color of their own. So a black wolf will seek out a gray wolf and vice versa. This pretty much maintains the genetic diversity of the population to be about 50-50, and you can see why in this Punnett square here. When a KYY and a KBY wolf mate with each other, their offspring are pretty much gonna be that 50-50 division. Obviously not every time because Punnett squares are not perfect, but for the most part, the alleles are going to be distributed 50-50, which will continue to keep the phenotype frequencies at about that range. And you can see in this graph over here that as the years progress, the proportion of wolves with a black coat when under disassortative mating is at about a solid 50%, as well as random mating. So because the frequencies are 50-50, both random and dissortative are going to have about a 50-50 chance of producing a black wolf. Whereas with assortative mating, because the homozygous black wolves have such a lower fitness, it's actually going to decrease the amount of black wolves that are in the population, because if a black wolf is mating with a black wolf, they're more likely to create a homozygous black wolf, which has a lower fitness, and the frequency of that allele is going to go down. So what are the ecological impacts of this? When the canine distemperament virus is not present, gray homozygotes have a higher fitness, and vice versa. When the virus is less prevalent, the phenotype distributions will shift towards gray wolves, and again, vice versa. If the virus becomes more prevalent again, then phenotype distributions will shift back to black. This can be seen in this graph where the frequency of the outbreak affects the growth of the population. So with dissortative mating, where you're maintaining that 50-50 allele frequency, as the outbreak frequency increases, it's going to stay in the positive values, so they're going to have positive growth pretty much no matter what. Whereas with assortative mating, as the frequency increases, it is going to increase, but you're still going to be in the negatives, so the population is actually going to be decreasing through assortative mating if there is an outbreak. So why is this something that we should care about? Besides me, who just really likes wolves, this is a great example of a lot of evolutionary and ecological trends happening in real life. So it's an example of a beneficial mutation, which again pushes the idea that not all mutations are bad. Some of them can have good effects on the population. It has greatly changed the phenotype distribution of the gray wolf population overall, which is a valid example of evolution happening in real time. And since the K locus originated from crossbreeding, research on the wolf's K locus can lead to more research on beneficial crossbreeding of other species. I think this is the really important part where we can look at these immunity genes and we can look at the pylotrophic effects of this gene on the population and say, okay, what other species can we help protect and help benefit through a crossbreeding process like this? And here are my references. Thank you for watching and listening, and hopefully you learned something today.